She wasn't supposed to make it through the night. Not in that kind of cold. Not with the wind cutting through the trees like a blade and the temperature dropping below 10 degrees. But still she stayed, curled tight around the only warmth she had left, her puppies pressed against her chest, as if her heartbeat alone could keep them alive, while the storm whispered something final through the dark. Miles away, Officer Daniel Hayes drove slowly down a forgotten stretch of county road, his patrol. Lights off, the world reduced to a tunnel of pale headlights and drifting snow. His hands steady on the wheel, but his eyes distant, carrying the quiet weight of years he never spoke about. The kind that settles in your bones and doesn't leave, not even when the uniform comes off. And tonight felt heavier than most, like the silence itself was trying to say something he wasn't ready to hear. The wind picked up, rattling the branches above and sending a fine spray of powder across the asphalt. The kind that erased tracks and buried stories before anyone could find them. And that's when he saw it. Not clearly at first. Just a shape at the edge of the road where the ditch dipped into shadow. Something too still to be debris and too deliberate to be random. An instinct, not protocol, made his foot ease off the gas as the cruiser rolled to a slow stop, engine humming low like it too was waiting. For a moment, he just sat there, listening. The faint tick of cooling metal, the distant howl of wind, and then something softer, almost lost in the noise, a fragile sound that didn't belong to the storm. A whimper, thin and uneven, barely more than breath. And Daniel's jaw tightened as he reached for the flashlight resting beside him. The beam slicing through the darkness as he stepped out into the cold, boots crunching against frozen gravel, the air biting at his face, sharp and immediate, grounding him in a way nothing else had all day. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, the light sweeping across brittle grass and snow-dusted earth until it found her, a German shepherd curled into herself, her coat stiff with frost, her body trembling in small, stubborn shivers that refused to stop. And beneath her, barely visible at first, a cluster of tiny shapes pressed close, their fur damp, their movements weak but there, still there, and she lifted her head when the light touched her, eyes catching the beam with a dull amber glow, not fear, not aggression, just something quieter, something that held its ground without a sound. And Daniel felt it before he understood it, that unspoken line between them, the one that said she had nothing left to give but wasn't leaving anyway. He crouched a few feet away, lowering the light so it wouldn't blind her, his breath curling in the air as he studied the fragile rise and fall of her chest, counting without meaning to, measuring life in seconds. And one of the puppies shifted, a faint movement that broke the stillness just enough to pull something deep inside him back to the surface, something he had spent a long time trying to keep buried. And he swallowed hard, voice low, almost lost to the wind. "Hey, stay with me." The words. Simple, automatic, but carrying more weight than he intended, and the dog didn't move away, didn't growl, didn't even flinch. She just watched him, her head lowering slightly, as if acknowledging the sound, as if deciding, in that quiet, frozen moment, that this stranger with the steady voice and careful hands was not a threat but a chance, however small. And Daniel reached out slowly, palm open. The distance between them measured not in inches, but in trust, the kind that isn't given easily, not out here, not like this. And for a heartbeat the world held still, the storm pausing just long enough for something unseen to shift, for a decision to be made that would change more than just one night on a forgotten road. The distance closed slowly, not with force but with patience, Daniel keeping his movements measured, his voice steady as the wind pressed harder against his back. And when his fingers finally brushed the edge of her fur it felt colder than he expected, stiff with ice. Yet beneath it there was still warmth, faint but stubborn, and she did not pull away, she only watched him. Her breathing shallow but determined as if every breath was a choice she refused to give up, and that was enough for him to move closer, kneeling fully now, the cold seeping through his uniform while he shifted the beam of light to see the small bodies tucked beneath her, counting them once, then again, for puppies, each one barely moving, their tiny sides rising unevenly, and one of them so still that it made his chest tighten before he could stop it, because he had seen stillness like that before, and he knew what it often meant. But he also knew better than to decide too quickly, not tonight, not here. He took off his gloves, ignoring the sting of cold against his skin, and gently slid his hand beneath the nearest pup, lifting it just enough to feel for warmth, for any sign. And there it was, faint, almost hidden, a fragile pulse of life that flickered like a candle in the wind, and he let out a breath he did not realize he was holding. "All right," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "You are still here." And the words seemed to settle into the space between them, grounding him in something simple and clear, something that did not require him to think about anything else beyond this moment. The radio at his shoulder crackled suddenly, a sharp sound that cut through the quiet. Dispatch calling his unit, a routine check, a reminder that there were other places he was supposed to be, other calls waiting in a system that never stopped moving. And for a second his eyes flicked back toward the cruiser, toward the road, toward the version of the night that would have continued if he had never slowed down, if he had driven past like most people would. And the choice hovered there, silent but heavy, because staying meant stepping outside the line, meant delaying, meant caring in a way that could not be written into a report, and leaving meant something else entirely, something he knew he would carry long after the storm passed. He reached up and pressed the radio button, his voice calm, controlled. "Unit 12, I am on a situation, will report back shortly." And he released it before waiting for a response, because the decision had already been made, not in words but in the way he turned back to the dog, the way he leaned in closer, the way his hands moved. Without hesitation now, the mother shifted slightly, a low sound rising from her throat, not a warning but something protective, and Daniel paused, meeting her eyes again, letting her see him, letting her understand in whatever way animals do that he was not here to take, only to help. And after a long second she eased, just enough, her body loosening a fraction as if granting permission she did not have the strength to give fully. And that was all he needed. He slipped his jacket off, the cold biting instantly through his shirt, but he ignored it as he spread the fabric gently beside her, creating a small pocket of insulation against the frozen ground. Then one by one he began to move the puppies, slow and careful, keeping them close to her warmth, adjusting them so they were not pressed too tightly, so they could breathe, his hands working with a quiet urgency that never turned into panic, because panic would not help them. And somewhere in the middle of it he felt it again, that familiar pull in his chest, the memory of a moment he had not been fast enough, not careful enough, a moment that had ended differently. And he pushed it aside not by forgetting, but by choosing to stay, choosing to try, choosing to believe that sometimes effort was enough to tip the balance. When he reached the smallest pup, the one that had not moved, he hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then gently cupped it in both hands, bringing it closer to his chest, shielding it from the wind, his breath warming the space between them as he waited, counting again, 1, 2, 3, and then there it was, a faint twitch, barely there but real, and his eyes closed briefly as something inside him shifted, something quiet and fragile that he had not felt in a long time. And when he opened them again, he looked at the mother, still watching him through half-lidded eyes, and gave the smallest nod, as if to say they were not done yet, not tonight. The storm did not ease, not yet, the wind still threading through the trees with a low, restless sound. But something within that small circle of light had changed, something quieter, steadier, as Daniel adjusted his position and pulled the edge of his jacket closer around the puppies, creating a fragile barrier against the cold ground, his hands moving with care learned not from training manuals, but from moments life had forced on him, moments where hesitation cost too much, and he was not about to let this be one of them. The mother watched every movement, her eyes no longer dull but alert in a different way now, tracking him not as a threat, but as a presence she was beginning to understand. And when his hand brushed lightly along her shoulder, she did not tense, she leaned, just slightly, a shift so small it could have been missed, but he felt it, that quiet allowance, that fragile agreement between two living beings trying to hold the line against something larger than both of them. He glanced toward the road again, the cruiser's headlights cutting through the snowfall in a steady beam, a reminder of warmth, of shelter just a few steps away. And he knew they could not stay here much longer, not with the temperature dropping and the wind growing sharper by the minute. So he moved with more purpose now, though still gentle, sliding one arm carefully beneath the mother's chest, testing her weight, feeling how little strength she had left, and for a second she resisted, a faint tightening in her body, a protective instinct that had carried her this far, and Daniel paused immediately, lowering his gaze, softening his voice. "It is all right. I have got you." The words simple, but steady, offered not as a command but as reassurance, and after a long breath she eased again, her body settling just enough for him to continue. He lifted her slowly, supporting her as best he could, surprised by how light she felt, not fragile in spirit but worn down by the cold and the long fight to keep her pups alive. And as he shifted her toward the jacket, one of the puppies let out a faint, wavering sound, the kind that barely reaches the ear but goes straight to the chest, and Daniel felt something tighten inside him again, not fear this time, but urgency, a quiet insistence that there was still time, still something to be done. He worked quickly now, gathering the puppies one by one, tucking them securely into the folds of his jacket, keeping them close together, their small bodies pressing against each other for warmth. And each time he lifted one, he checked for movement, for breath, for that faint but undeniable sign that life was still holding on, and each time he found it, even if only barely. And it was enough to keep him moving, enough to keep the doubt from creeping in. When the last of them was secured, he turned back to the mother, lowering her gently beside them, guiding her so she could feel them again, so she would know they were still there. And her head dropped forward, her nose brushing against the bundle as if counting them without sight. And then, for the first time, her breathing seemed to steady, not strong, not yet, but less frantic, less desperate, as if something inside her had decided to trust this moment, to believe that maybe, just maybe, the fight was shifting. Daniel stood slowly, gathering the jacket in his arms, careful not to disturb the fragile arrangement, and as he did, a sudden gust of wind swept across the clearing, stronger than before, pushing against him with a force that made him brace his stance, the cold biting deeper, sharper, a reminder that time was not on their side. And he turned toward the cruiser without hesitation, each step deliberate on the frozen ground. His focus narrowed to the weight in his arms, to the quiet, uneven breaths he could feel through the layers of fabric, and behind him, the place where they had been moments ago already began to disappear beneath drifting snow, as if the night itself was closing over what had nearly been lost, leaving only the path ahead, lit by headlights and the steady promise of warmth waiting just within reach. The cruiser door opened with a dull creak against the wind, and the warmth inside felt almost unreal compared to the biting cold outside, a thin pocket of safety carved out in the middle of a storm that showed no sign of mercy. And Daniel moved carefully as he lowered himself into the driver's seat, keeping the bundle of life steady in his arms, his breath still visible in short bursts as he pulled the door shut with his elbow, sealing them inside with a soft, final thud that seemed to quiet the world for just a moment. The engine idled low, the heater beginning its slow work, pushing out air that was not yet warm but no longer freezing, and he shifted the jacket gently onto the passenger seat, adjusting the folds so the puppies remained close together, his hands hovering for a second, as if unwilling to let go completely, and the mother stirred, her head lifting weakly as she felt the change in temperature, her nose brushing against the nearest pup again, checking, always checking, and Daniel exhaled, long and steady, as he reached over to turn the heat higher, the fan humming louder now, filling the silence with something constant, something alive. He pulled off his hat and rubbed a hand over his face, the cold still clinging to his skin, and for a brief second he closed his eyes, not to rest but to steady himself, to hold on to the fragile sense that this moment mattered in a way that went beyond routine, beyond duty. And when he opened them again, his gaze went straight back to the small forms beside him, watching for movement, for any sign that the warmth was doing its work, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, it was a twitch here, a faint shift there, tiny changes that would mean nothing to someone not looking closely. But to him they were everything. One of the puppies let out a soft, uneven sound, and he leaned closer, his voice low, instinctive. "That is it, stay with me." The words carried more hope now than fear, and the mother responded in her own way, her breathing deepening just enough to notice, her body relaxing into the seat as if the fight that had held her upright for so long was finally loosening its grip, not because she was giving up, but because she did not have to hold it alone anymore. The radio crackled again, sharper this time. Dispatch calling for status, asking for location, routine questions that felt distant now, like they belonged to another version of the night, and Daniel reached for it without looking away from the dogs, pressing the button with a calm that did not betray the urgency beneath it. Unit 12 transporting animals in distress, requesting clearance to divert to nearest veterinary clinic. His voice steady, measured, and after a brief pause the reply came through. Confirmation, acknowledgement, permission granted, simple words that cleared the path ahead. He set the radio back and shifted the cruiser into gear, easing onto the road with care, the tires gripping the snow as he guided the vehicle forward, the headlights carving a narrow corridor through the storm. And for a moment the world outside seemed distant, secondary. His attention anchored entirely to the quiet, fragile lives beside him, to the rhythm of their breathing, uneven but present, and as the miles stretched out ahead, each one felt like a small victory, a step further away from where they had been, from the cold ground and the silence that had nearly claimed them. The mother lifted her head again, just slightly, her eyes finding him in the dim glow of the dashboard. And there was something different in that look now, something softer. Not fully trust, but no longer uncertainty, and Daniel met it without speaking, his hand resting lightly near the edge of the jacket, close enough for her to feel, not touching, just there, a steady presence in the shifting dark, and for the first time since the night began, the storm outside seemed less overwhelming, not because it had changed, but because inside that small moving space, something else had begun to take hold, something quiet and persistent, like a fragile promise carried forward on 4 weak heartbeats and one man who refused to let them fade. The road stretched ahead in a narrow ribbon of pale gray, barely visible beneath the drifting snow, and Daniel kept both hands steady on the wheel, his eyes moving between the fading lines of the asphalt and the fragile lives resting beside him, the heater now pushing out a steady stream of warmth that slowly filled the cabin, softening the cold that had followed them inside. And with it came small changes, subtle but undeniable, the kind that only revealed themselves if you watched closely. Enough. One of the puppies shifted again, this time with more purpose, its tiny paw pressing weakly against the fold of the jacket as if testing the world it had nearly left behind, and Daniel felt it more than saw it. A quiet reassurance that the fight was not over, that something inside these small bodies was still choosing to stay, and he let out a slow breath, his grip on the wheel easing just slightly as the tension in his shoulders began to loosen. The mother lay still for a long moment, her breathing deep and uneven, but then she moved, lifting her head just enough to adjust herself closer to the puppies, her body instinctively forming a barrier even here, even in the safety of the cruiser, and Daniel glanced at her, catching the way her eyes flickered open, meeting his for just a second before drifting back to the small bundle at her side. And there was something in that glance that felt different now, not the guarded watchfulness from before, but something quieter, something that carried the first fragile hint of trust. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm, clearing away the snow that tried to reclaim the glass, and beyond it, the faint glow of distant lights began to appear. Small at first, almost uncertain, but growing stronger as he drove, the outline of the town slowly emerging through the storm like a promise waiting at the edge of the night. And Daniel leaned forward slightly, his focus sharpening, because he knew they were close now, close enough that the outcome of this night would soon be decided not by the cold or the wind, but by what came next. He reached over with one hand, adjusting the jacket again, tucking it more securely around the puppies, making sure their bodies stayed close, their warmth shared. And as he did, one of them let out a faint, almost questioning sound, softer than before but clearer, and the mother responded immediately, her nose brushing against it, a gentle, instinctive motion that spoke of a bond stronger than the storm that had tried to break it. And Daniel felt something shift inside him again, something that had been quiet for too long, something that reminded him why moments like this mattered, why he had chosen this path in the first place. The cruiser turned onto a narrower street, the tires crunching against packed snow as he slowed, scanning for the small building he knew would still be open at this hour, a place that had seen its share of late-night emergencies, though none quite like this. And then he saw it, a single-story clinic with a dim light glowing above the entrance. the sign partially obscured by snow but still visible enough to guide him, and he pulled into the lot with care, the engine idling as he brought the vehicle to a stop, the sudden stillness inside the cabin almost startling after the constant motion of the drive. For a moment he did not move, his eyes returning to the passenger seat, to the quiet rise and fall of 4 tiny chests and the steady, protective presence beside them, and he reached out slowly, his hand hovering just above the mother's fur before settling gently against it. A brief, careful touch that carried no demand, only reassurance, and she did not pull away. She simply remained there, her breathing calm enough now to hold, to continue, and Daniel nodded once, more to himself than to her, as if confirming what he already knew, that they had made it this far, that the night had not taken them, not yet. And as he opened the door and stepped back into the cold, the wind no longer felt as sharp, because this time, he was not walking into it alone. He was carrying something that had already begun to change the weight of everything around him. The clinic door opened with a soft chime that felt almost out of place against the storm outside, warm air spilling into the cold night as Daniel stepped in, carrying the bundle close to his chest, his boots leaving faint traces of melted snow across the tiled floor. And for a moment, everything slowed, the harsh wind replaced by a quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the distant ticking of a wall clock. A different kind of urgency lived here, one that moved with purpose but without panic. A woman behind the counter looked up immediately, her expression shifting the second she saw what he was holding, concern replacing routine in an instant as she stepped around the desk. "Bring them here," she said, her voice calm but firm, already guiding him toward a treatment table under a bright overhead lamp, and Daniel moved without hesitation, carefully laying the jacket down, unfolding it just enough to reveal the small lives within. The mother's head lifting weakly at the change, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar space before settling briefly on him again, as if anchoring herself in the one thing she recognized. The veterinarian, a woman in her early 40s with steady hands and a quiet presence, approached quickly, her movements practiced but gentle, and she paused for just a second before touching the mother, allowing that silent exchange that mattered more than any spoken reassurance. And then she began, her fingers checking, assessing, reading signs that others might miss, while a technician moved beside her, bringing warm towels, soft blankets, and a small heat lamp that cast a golden glow over the table. Daniel stepped back only slightly, his hands still hovering at the edge, unwilling to fully let go, his eyes tracking every movement, every subtle reaction. And when one of the puppies gave a faint cry under the warmth of the lamp, the veterinarian nodded almost to herself. "That is good," she murmured, not loudly, not for anyone else, but the words landed anyway, steady and certain, and Daniel felt his shoulders drop a fraction, the tension he had carried since the roadside easing just enough to let him breathe more fully. The mother shifted again, her strength still fragile but present, her body responding to the warmth, to the careful hands. And when the veterinarian gently guided her onto a padded surface, she resisted for only a moment before settling, her nose searching again for her puppies. And when she found them, nestled closer now, warmer than before, her breathing deepened in a way that spoke of something more than survival, something closer to relief. Daniel stood there, silent, watching as life slowly returned in small, quiet ways, the kind that did not announce themselves but built steadily, like a rhythm finding its way back after being lost. And he realized he had not looked at the clock, not once since he walked in. Time had become something else entirely, measured not in minutes, but in breaths, in movement, in the soft sounds of creatures refusing to fade. The veterinarian glanced up at him then, her eyes meeting his with a calm understanding. "You got them here in time," she said simply, and there was no exaggeration in her tone, no attempt to soften or dramatize, just a clear acknowledgement of what had been done. And Daniel nodded once, his throat tightening slightly as he looked back at the table, at the mother who was now resting more fully, her eyes half closed but no longer distant, and the puppies, each one showing a little more life than before, their small bodies responding to the warmth and care surrounding them. He let out a slow breath, one that seemed to carry the weight of the entire night with it. And for the first time since he had stepped out of his cruiser, he allowed himself to step back fully, his hands lowering to his sides, not because he was done, but because he no longer needed to hold everything together alone. And as he stood there, watching quietly, the storm outside continued to move through the night. But inside, something else had taken hold, something steady and undeniable, a quiet turning point where survival began to give way to something softer, something that did not need to fight quite so hard anymore. Time moved differently inside the clinic, not marked by clocks, but by the slow return of warmth, by the steady rhythm of breathing that grew stronger with each passing minute. And Daniel remained where he was, leaning slightly against the wall, his eyes never straying far from the table where the mother and her puppies rested beneath the soft glow of the heat lamp. The golden light casting gentle shadows that replaced the harsh edges of the night outside, and for the first time since he had found them, the room felt still in a way that was not heavy, not filled with tension, but with something quieter, something that allowed space for life to settle back into place. One of the puppies stirred more noticeably now, its small body stretching weakly against the blanket, and a faint sound followed, no longer just a fragile whisper, but something closer to a voice, uncertain but present, and the veterinarian glanced down with a slight nod, adjusting the blanket to keep the warmth contained, her movements calm, precise, and Daniel felt a subtle shift inside him. Again, a quiet recognition that they were moving beyond the edge they had been standing on, step by step, breath by breath. The mother lifted her head once more, slower this time, her strength returning in small, careful increments, and her eyes moved across the room before settling on Daniel, holding there for a moment longer than before, and he did not look away, did not move, he simply stood there, meeting that gaze with the same steady presence he had offered from the beginning, and something unspoken passed between them, something that did not need words, an understanding built not on trust given freely, but on trust earned through action, through staying when it would have been easier to leave. The technician stepped in quietly, placing a small dish of water within reach, and the mother shifted toward it, hesitant at first, then taking a slow, careful drink, each movement deliberate, as if she was relearning the simple act of caring for herself now that her puppies were no longer in immediate danger. And Daniel watched that moment with a quiet focus, recognizing the significance in it, because survival was not just about holding on, it was about beginning again, even in the smallest ways. The veterinarian straightened slightly, glancing toward Daniel with a calm, measured expression. "They are responding well," she said, her voice low, steady. And there was a quiet certainty in her tone that did not overpromise, did not guarantee anything beyond what was visible. But it was enough, more than enough, and Daniel nodded slowly, his hand lifting unconsciously to rest against the back of a nearby chair, grounding himself in the reality of the moment, in the fact that they had made it this far. Outside, the storm continued its slow passage, the sound of wind faint now against the walls, no longer the overwhelming force it had been earlier, and inside, the air held a different kind of weight, one that carried the quiet presence of second chances, of moments that could have ended differently but did not. And Daniel found himself thinking, not in words, not in clear memories, but in fragments of feeling, in the echo of nights that had not gone this way, in the contrast between what had been lost and what was now being held together, fragile but real. One of the puppies shifted again, pressing closer to its siblings, and the mother responded instantly, her body adjusting to cover them just enough, a familiar instinct returning, but softer now, less desperate, more assured. And Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering as he allowed himself to step a fraction further back, not leaving, not disconnecting, but giving space, understanding that his role in this moment was changing, from the one who carried them through the storm to the one who simply remained, present, steady. And as he stood there, watching the quiet rhythm of life continue under the soft light, he realized that something within him had shifted as well, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the same way as everything else that night, slowly, quietly, in a way that could only be understood by those who had seen how close it had come to being lost. The hours passed quietly, not unnoticed but no longer heavy, the clinic settling into a softer rhythm as the storm outside began to lose its edge, the wind fading into something distant, almost tired, and inside, the warmth held steady, wrapping around everything like a promise that refused to break, and Daniel found himself still there, though no one had asked him to stay. His shift long since stretched beyond its usual bounds. Yet he did not feel the pull to leave, not when the outcome of this night was still unfolding in small, meaningful ways. The veterinarian moved with the same calm precision, checking each puppy again, her hands gentle but certain, and this time there was a difference, subtle but clear, their movements more coordinated, their breathing more even, tiny signs of strength returning where there had once been only fragility, and one of them let out a small, insistent sound. No longer just a weak echo, but something closer to a call, and the technician smiled faintly as she adjusted the blanket. "That one has some fight," she said softly, and Daniel heard it. Not just the words, but the truth behind them. The quiet acknowledgement that survival had turned a corner. The mother was stronger now, too. Not fully recovered. Not yet. But her posture had changed. Her body no longer curled in desperate defense, but resting in a way that suggested she believed the danger had passed, at least for now. And when she lifted her head again, her eyes found Daniel more easily this time, without hesitation, and he stepped a little closer, not intruding, just present, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the table. And after a moment, she moved, slow and deliberate, extending her nose just enough to brush against his fingers, a contact so brief it could have been imagined. But it was real, and it carried more weight than anything else that had happened that night, because it was not instinct, not survival. It was something chosen. Daniel did not move his hand away. He simply let it rest there, steady, allowing her to decide the distance. And when she pulled back, settling again beside her puppies, he felt something inside him settle as well, something that had been restless for longer than he cared to admit. And the room seemed quieter because of it, not empty, but complete in a way that did not demand anything more. The veterinarian approached him again, her expression thoughtful. "They will need a place after this," she said gently, not as a question, not as an expectation, just a simple statement of what would come next. And Daniel looked back at the small family, at the way the puppies had begun to cluster together with a new kind of energy, at the mother who now rested without the constant tension that had once defined her every movement. And he did not answer right away, because some decisions did not arrive fully formed. They grew quietly in the space between moments, in the silence where meaning had time to take shape. Outside, the first faint hint of dawn began to touch the horizon, a pale light filtering through the edges of the storm clouds, soft and uncertain, but unmistakable. And it reached through the clinic windows, blending with the artificial glow of the lamps, creating a gentle contrast that marked the passing of the night. And Daniel noticed it without turning his head, sensing the shift more than seeing it. And he let out a slow breath, one that carried not just relief but something deeper, something closer to gratitude, though he would not have called it that out loud. The puppies stirred again, one pressing forward with a little more strength than before, nudging against its mother, and she responded instantly, her head lowering to meet it, her movements calm, assured, and Daniel watched that exchange with quiet focus, understanding that this was the moment that mattered. Not the rescue, not the urgency of the night, but this, the simple continuation of life, the quiet rebuilding of something that had nearly been lost. And as he stood there, with the storm fading behind him and the first light of morning beginning to rise, he realized that what had changed was not just their fate, but something within him as well, something that had been waiting, perhaps longer than he knew, for a reason to feel whole again. Morning arrived without announcement, just a gradual softening of the light as it filtered through the clinic windows, turning the edges of the room from pale gray into something warmer, something alive. And Daniel stood near the table, not as tense as before, not as watchful in the same urgent way, but still present, still anchored to the quiet rhythm that had carried them through the night. And in front of him, the small family had changed in ways that did not need words to be understood. The puppies were no longer motionless shapes wrapped in uncertainty. They shifted now with intention, pressing against each other, nudging forward in small, uncoordinated movements that spoke of strength returning where there had been almost none. And one of them let out a soft, uneven bark, the sound fragile but unmistakable, and it seemed to settle into the room like a quiet declaration that life had chosen to stay. The mother lay close beside them, her body no longer rigid with strain, her breathing steady enough to rest. And when she lifted her head, it was not out of fear or instinct, but simply to look, to take in the space around her, and her eyes found Daniel again, not searching this time, not questioning, just resting there for a moment, calm and certain, and he met that gaze without hesitation, his expression unchanged, but something deeper in it softened, something that did not need to be spoken aloud. The veterinarian approached once more, her movements slower now, less urgent, and she checked the puppies with a practiced ease, her hands gentle as she adjusted the blankets and ensured the warmth remained consistent. And when she finished, she gave a small nod, more to herself than anyone else, as if confirming what the room already knew, that they had crossed the line between danger and recovery. And though there would still be time needed, still care required, the hardest part had passed. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing as he allowed that truth to settle fully, not as relief alone, but as something steadier, something that reached further than the events of the night. And he stepped closer once more, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, not intruding, not reaching, just there, a quiet presence that had become part of the space itself. And the mother shifted slightly, her nose brushing once more against the air near his hand, not quite touching this time, but close enough to carry the same meaning, the same silent acknowledgement that had been building since the moment they met in the snow. Outside, the last traces of the storm drifted away, leaving behind a world that looked untouched from a distance, as if nothing had happened at all, as if the night had not held the weight it did. And inside, the clinic returned to its usual calm, the sounds of routine slowly replacing the intensity of the hours before. But Daniel remained for a moment longer, his eyes taking in the small details, the rise and fall of tiny chests, the steady presence of the mother, the quiet work of the people who had carried them the rest of the way. He did not say anything when he finally stepped back, did not offer a conclusion or a reflection, because none was needed. And as he turned toward the door, the light of morning following him out, there was a stillness in his movement that had not been there before, not empty, not distant, but settled, as if something within him had found its place again without asking for recognition. And behind him, the small family remained, alive, warm, and together, their quiet breaths filling the room in a way that said more than words ever could, a simple, enduring truth carried forward into the new day, where nothing needed to be explained, only lived.